What's up? So, I had a very interesting thing come up in my feed not too long ago. And it was on, like, how do you react to other people showing, flirting with your partner, your person, your spouse, whatever. And it made me think back to a lot of funny stories from my last two relationships, my last two serious long-term relationships, right? My marriage of 12 years, and then I dated a guy off and on for like 5 years. And in both of those situations, I had, this experience. And what I realized it all comes down to for me, and everybody's gonna have their own way of handling it and their own feelings about all of it. But for me, as long as my person responded appropriately, I was fine. And that's how I expect it to be done. I expect my person to handle it well, so that there's no reason for me to say anything to the other party. Like, I shouldn't have to. And some examples of that. When my ex-husband and I first got married, I was 18. And he was 21. 21? 22? Maybe he was 22. Anyway, we had a mutual friend. Well, I didn't realize how mutual. What I mean by that is that apparently she had been in the habit of texting him and messaging him before he and I were ever together. She had a troubled background. A lot of things happened for her in her life that were just very extremely traumatic and troubling. And so she had a lot of issues that she was coping with. And so after we got married, he said, she's reached out to him, texted him. And I said, okay, and he was like intensely uncomfortable. He was like, it's just weird. I don't think it's, and I said, let's look at it like this. She was a little younger than me. And before, she had kind of leaned on him as sort of a voice of reason kind of thing. And he felt sorry for her. So for her situation and everything. And so I said, she's legitimately got a lot on her plate that she's been through. And so I said, why don't I just try to be more supportive? And he just told her, he wasn't comfortable with her texting him, but that didn't change the way that I treated her. So I invited her over to spend the day with me one day. And we went and we got, something to eat, and I was painting our new apartment. So she, helped me a little bit with that. And then I made dinner for us, and she ate dinner with my husband and I, and everything was fine. And nothing negative ever came out of the way that I dealt with that situation. Because I didn't look at her as a threat immediately. He had done, his part of things, but I still felt concerned for her situation and wanted to be supportive. So she ended up, moving forward with her life and doing her own thing, and moving away and all that. But there were a lot of other times, maybe we'd be in public or something. There was another person who had we had another close friend who, said that she sensed that he was attracted to her, which is not unlikely. She was a gorgeous girl, and this was also just a few years after we got married. And I think it was after the birth of our first child or something. And a lot of my attention was focused on our daughter. And he told me, before I ever heard anything else from her through other people, that he felt this like she was giving him getting in his personal space a little bit, that he didn't feel entirely comfortable with it, and he didn't know if it was his imagination, but he wasn't, and that's part of the reason, is that he was very transparent with those kinds of things that he noticed. He would vocalize those, and later found out that she did. How he read the situation was exactly how it was, and I don't think it was so much that she necessarily, because by this time I was like 20. I think I was like 20 years old by this time, and she would have been a little bit younger, and a lot younger than him for sure. And I looked at it like, she's not really interested in him though. She's in general sort of trying this whole attraction thing out, right? She's experimenting a little bit with her power as a young woman, and this is something that young women go through. And especially if they've had, like, she also had traumas and stuff like that. Like, she had her issues, and she grew up to have a lot of issues later, major issues in her life later, her choices. But what I saw was a slightly troubled young lady that is, and my ex-husband handled that situation well. Also, I didn't treat this girl any different. Her mom and I were very communicative, and so we were friends. And so I mentioned it to her mother a little bit, and I said, I'm not, upset or bothered. I said, but, just so you know, because they were dealing with other things with her. And, but anyway, later, through life, there would be different times when people in public maybe would flirt with him or whatever, and I would be standing there, and it was very obvious that we were together. And a lot of times it actually amused me. And as long as he responded in a way that showed respect for the relationship, then I could shrug it off. Because my view is, if you have something that's of any value, other people are going to notice that and probably like it too. Or they will still just like something because you have it. And that's something that somebody later kind of mentioned, is that there was some slight jealousy, because even though people didn't know all the problems that we were actually having, I looked fine. I looked happy. I looked like, we're crazy about each other. Like, that's what people saw. And that can incite jealousy, whether or not it's true. So, and then with my ex-husband also, he worked in a job where he came in contact with new people constantly. He would show up sometimes. He did a lot of different things, and one of them was sometimes he would make deliveries for his company. And so he would show up in these really swanky, fancy neighborhoods, right? And he would say, yeah, sometimes these women, they come to the door in their, lacy sleepwear, and they're, in this just very non-professional attire, and sometimes they flirt with him a little bit, but so regardless, I have always had the view that I can't really do anything about controlling another person, and I don't really want to spend my energy trying to do that. So I choose to give benefit of the doubt until I see a real reason to do otherwise. Now, and then my last relationship, I was dating someone who was who I considered physically attractive, and fit and active, and albeit he had some health issues, but he took care of himself, and he groomed himself very well, and he worked in a corporate environment, international corporate environment. So he was coming in contact with a lot of people all the time, and emailing and texting and all this kind of thing, and men and women. And he, on his team, the people that he had to communicate with, a good number of them were women. And he was also very open and transparent with me about them. Like, he would tell me, things about, interactions, conversations, stuff like that. And again, I chose to give benefit of the doubt. Now, there's things, that you can't always necessarily, there's things you can't police, right? If your spouse has wandering eyes and you're not there, if, maybe they never actually text anyone inappropriately or never call anyone inappropriately, right? There's a whole plethora of other behaviors that they can use to signal attraction to other people that, what are you going to do? And so with that kind of situation, that would be something that if I had noticed, I would have addressed it if I felt like it was something I wanted to address. We're not together anymore, and not for any of those reasons. But it depends on how much I'm invested in the relationship. So, like, if we were going to long term be together, there would be things that I would have mentioned more. Because you have to be with somebody that is honest, because if you recognize behavior, and it's not just noticing another person, like, I think it's very normal to notice an attractive person in your vicinity, but to notice someone and then to keep on looking or signaling or whatever, like, those are very different things. And I don't hold with being like unnecessarily rude. I saw this video on TikTok, and it was so cute. This wife was videoing her husband, and he was telling her this story, and I loved it. He was an attractive guy, and he was at the grocery store, and he told her, I see this woman and she notices me. And he says, like, I noticed that she notices me. He goes, and I can tell. He goes, I can just feel it. I know what she's going to do. I know what's going to happen. She does. She makes her way over to him and tries to strike up a conversation. And she says, he was in the produce section and he was getting something. She was like, oh, how do you, I can never get mine to turn out. How do you prepare yours? And he immediately said, I don't know. I don't cook. My wife, she does this. My wife cooks this. She sent me to the grocery store with a list, and this is what I'm getting for her. She's cooked. She's a great cook. And my thing was like, that's how you handle it, right? Until someone's being more overtly pushy, that's how you handle it. You just bring up your other person. And when I'm trying to tone down something that I'm receiving, that's usually what I do, is I will bring up either my person, or I'll bring up, if I know their spouse or their mate, or I know of them, I will try to include them in, mention of them in the conversation, so that everybody's reminded of what, the dynamics here should, be, that the interaction here, let's keep this, let's keep this appropriate so that nobody has a reason to feel offended about it. So typically that's like, I worked in an environment with mostly men in my last job. 2 years, all men, except for one woman in the front office who I didn't directly, like, I might see her once a day, maybe. And a lot of them were married. I was in a relationship, and I also grew up with 3 brothers. So I'm very comfortable with communication with men, and I'm capable of communicating, very directly. And I tend to treat men like I would my brothers. When, you get comfortable with each other after a couple of years of working with people, right? It's the day in and day out. You have jokes. You have, that's just normal human interaction. And I wouldn't expect to find anything different with my partner or spouse, that they also have jokes with their people. Now, I don't ever hold with things like work wife, work husband. I think that starts to get into the realm of another person's, you're starting to get into somebody else's space at that point, in my opinion. Other people may not agree, and that's fine. It works for other people. They don't care. That's fine. For me, I don't do that. So Yeah, but so that's kind of how I approach things. I don't like to have to go around policing another person personally all the time. Like, I don't like having to go and check in their phones, and I don't like having to go check emails, and I don't like having to go figure out if they're where they said they are. And I understand there are situations where, if you have legitimate reasons and you're dealing with someone who will not be open and honest with you about things, like my ex-boyfriend, he would check emails and text messages with, like, in my presence. And he sometimes, he would let me read them if he was working on something and I, was just present. He would be like, look at this, and so that kind of transparency helps a lot. I'm well aware that things can happen when you're not present, and those are just things that I don't have any control over, right? You have to trust that your person at some level, like if you can't trust them to be out in public by themselves, what is the point of even being together? I'm just saying. So you've got bigger problems that if you can't trust that somebody behaves themselves when they go out in public and they're not with you and that they're not honoring your relationship. There are way bigger problems than whether or not they are flirty. You've got, a whole, the way that they view your relationship and the way they view you, and there's a whole deeper issue. If you really have to, you feel like you got to keep tabs on them like that. So, and some people do, and more power to them if they are willing to go through that kind of effort to stay with their person and to keep their relationship safe, and they want to go through all of that, expend all that time and energy to do that. I had nothing to say. It's just not for me. So that's my opinion on it. I'm just curious if there are other people who feel similarly. I'm a social person, and so I approve of being social with others. I approve of, whether you're at work, whether you're in public, whatever, of just bringing more joy and positivity to your interactions in the world. And you can do that while still remaining faithful to your person and showing respect for your intimate relationship with, with your person, with your spouse, whatever. So that's my thoughts on that. Have had experiences with it. I have had people flirt with my person in front of me, and it just comes down to, like, you should handle this, and because I should not have to, that kind of thing. And you should be able to manage that situation and keep it where it's supposed to be. Personally, I even kind of got a little bit of humor out of seeing, like with my ex-husband, when I could tell when his ego was just a little bit built up because he got attention from somebody, and it actually kind of amused me. I didn't experience it as a negative thing. It was kind of funny. So, but I also have a really good sense of humor.